when you say you're Dr. Seager, it means you must have a doctorate. Mine's in engineering. I'm not a medical doctor. I'm not a brain guy like Patrick. I'm an associate professor at the School of Sustainable Engineering at Arizona State University. And so you're entitled to ask, what the heck am I doing up here talking about cold exposure? There is a revolution going on right now under our noses in the science of cold exposure, and most people associate it with this man, Andrew Huberman. Everything your high school track coach told you about, your knees are hurting after your practice and so you should ice them. Huberman reads all the research and he says, no, that's wrong. If what you're doing is training for hypertrophy, if you're training for anabolic gains, if you're training because you want to get stronger, Huberman says, this is 2 years ago, wait 4 hours. Because he'd read all the literature. And there was no consistent scientific evidence that said you should use your cryotherapy after your exercise. And yet, most of the people who come into the cryotherapy salons, who are doing the cold plunges, still have it in their head that they should be doing it after. Well, that's wrong. Here's another example of what's wrong, of what's changing in cold therapy science. This is a paper from 2007. This is a Swedish team that, it used to be medical doctors thought there was no such thing as brown fat in human adults. But this Swedish medical team published a paper and they said, no, we think that there's plenty of brown fat in a few people. This was 2007, and since then there has been a whole new field of brown fat science. You can now get a dissertation in brown fat, and it's publishing papers like this that says brown fat is the key to metabolic health. And if you're not aware, it looks like this. On the left, there's no brown fat, and on the right, you can see the light up of the spots around the neck and around the heart where the brown fat exists. For a long time, the medical doctors thought there were no brown fat in human adults because it's rare. Babies have it, children have it, but most people lose it over time. Still, it was showing up on what's called positron emission tomography, PET scans. That's where the Swedish researchers found it, and when they went back at the Sloan Kettering Medical Institute in New York and said, well, let's look at all these PET scans and let's code them by age, they discovered that brown fat disappears if you don't get cold, which is a dang shame. It is brown fat that keeps you warm in the cold, but it's also brown fat that produces thyroid hormone. It's also brown fat that produces neuroprotective factors. And so this is what I mean by the change in science. It's not about reducing the pain of delayed onset muscle soreness anymore. Cold, we're beginning to realize, is an essential component of your body's expectations. It's like exercise. It's like sunshine. It's like nutrition. If you do not get enough cold, you get sick. And that is a totally different way of interpreting what is going on in the university. And it still doesn't have to do with engineering. This is how I got my start. I was in graduate school. I was a doctoral student. This is my son when he's 5 years old. You can see this is 2001. He was sick. My wife called our neighbor, John. He's our doctor. And she said, well, he's run down. It's been going on for days. And John said, it sounds like the flu. Kids get the flu. It's December. And that's what happens. And then my wife said, and he's peeing a lot. John said, you meet me in the hospital right away. Your son has diabetes. Your life is going to change. At that point, I had to know everything about metabolism that I didn't know. I didn't realize this was diabetes, and I felt shame because I wasn't able to. I was supposed to be a smart guy. I didn't know what was wrong with my kid. I carried him to the hospital because it's right across the street, and they put him in the pediatric intensive care unit. John came up to me with insulin syringes and an orange, and he said, nobody leaves this hospital until you figure these two things out. I kept scrupulous records, all of his insulin, everything he ate, all of his exercise, did that for years because I felt like his life was in my hands. And along the way, I learned everything the dietitians, everything the nutritionists, everything the endocrinologists were telling me was wrong. Or at least it was wrong enough where I had to figure it out all for myself. This is before continuous glucose monitors. This is before insulin pumps. Everything about his metabolism was recorded in his journals. And I had to go by the numbers that I saw in the journals and not the advice that I was getting from the dietitians and nutritionists. He did great. This is ketones. I had to learn how to measure mine because I was measuring him. When a type 1 diabetic isn't getting the insulin that they need, they can lapse into something called ketoacidosis. That's the condition my son was in when he was diagnosed. That's why he went to the intensive care unit. Now, keto is safe and it's healthy for me because I make insulin. It's remedial, that is, it will reverse type 2 diabetes because type 2 diabetes, people make insulin, but my son doesn't. I later found out, this is long after he was diagnosed, this is a study out of Finland, longitudinal. It says type 1 diabetes risk is associated with a lack of vitamin D in the first year of life. That's really good for me to know, but it's too late for me to help my son. Instead, I have now got this knowledge of metabolism and this knowledge of how insulin works, and I can work on everyone else, including myself. I started cold showers, this is, 2017, and I was kind of doing it because at this point, I'm divorced, and I'm at this pivot point in my life, and I'm thinking I really need to toughen up. And somebody on the internet told me cold showers are the way you toughen up. Then I got scared. This was the labs that I was doing. Oh, I should take care of my health. I lost a lot of weight. I should go get that male health panel, and this was my prostate. So you got a fat guy in his early 50s who gets a PSA, prostate-specific antigen, taken out of his blood, and it's 7. And it came back with the lab report in big red letters because 7 is too high. If I had gone to the endocrinologist, the urologist, if I'd gone to my doctor, they say, well, have you had a prostate exam lately? Hell no. I've been so worried about my son that I'd let my own health go to hell. Like I wasn't paying any attention to me, I was paying attention to my kids. I'd never had a prostate exam. And then they'd say, well, are you having difficulty urinating? I mean, how do I know? Now I'm so self-conscious about my prostate and my urination that I can barely pee. And everything is going around in my head like I'm gonna die of cancer. So I start talking to other men, my age, sometimes younger, sometimes a lot older, about whether they've been in this position, because you know what I'm like. I don't trust the dietitians, I don't trust the nutritionists, I don't trust the medical doctors, because I've been through that before. I'm gonna trust other patients. And the stories that they told me were horrific. The biopsies gone bad, the prostatectomies that left men with urinary incontinence, with erectile dysfunction for the rest of their lives, and I'm scared. Now, I'm not saying I know what I'm doing. I already told you I'm an engineer, not a medical doctor, but I'm looking at 7, and I know it's associated with an elevated risk of prostate cancer, and so my imagination is playing tricks on me. And I say, I am not going to the doctor. I'm gonna do everything else I can to see if I can manage this PSA, this prostate inflammation, by myself. So what do? I get serious about ice baths. I read Scott Carney's book, and it told me I was kind of doing the cold showers wrong. I'd be in there and I'd be like, this sucks. They made me so angry. And Scott was like, breathe. So I went into the ice bath, totally different experience. Now I'm breathing, now I'm relaxing. Prostate comes down from 7 to 1.8. I'm feeling pretty good about myself. I keep testing from 1.8 down to 1.5. Now I think I can go to the urologist. I can say, look, doc, I did it. I got a clean bill of health now, right? And so I go. I bring my lab reports. I'm thinking he's gonna give me a big pat on the back. That's not what he does. He skips over the PSA. He doesn't even care. He sees this. This is also in your male health panel. This is my testosterone. Now keep in mind, I'm like 53, I'm overweight, and I'm talking to this urologist who's about my age, and what jumps off the lab is in red with an H and an asterisk, because that total testosterone is too high. Now he doesn't say anything. He says, well, Tom, I think I want one more test. No, I don't know. I'll take another test. Am I in trouble? Did I not solve this problem? He goes, just take this lab down. I'm gonna write you out the report and he's testing my luteinizing hormone. I didn't know what luteinizing hormone was. I had to go look that one up too. Luteinizing hormone stimulates the gonads to make testosterone. And it turns out this guy thought, there's no way Seager's total testosterone is that high. He's gotta be juicing. He knows how to use those insulin needles. He's injecting himself, right? I want his luteinizing test, and this is what it came back. 8.9, out of range, too high. I sent that to my urologist. I never heard from him again. He didn't call me up and say, Oh, how did you do it? He wasn't curious in the least. And I can kind of get it because that's not what he does. That's not what men go to him for. But then I went to the library. I'm like, I got to learn. What is this luteinizing hormone? What happened to my testosterone? What happened to my PSA? Some of the guys that I talked to said they put me on testosterone suppression because my medical doctor told me that elevated testosterone increases my risk of prostate. And I said, I should figure this out. Well, this is a Japanese study from 1991 that I don't think anybody was paying any attention to until I uncovered it. And they tested, do your cold before your exercise, do your cold after your exercise. And sure enough, they found out the cold after exercise suppresses testosterone. It's no wonder Huberman says, wait 4 hours after your exercise before you do your cold. Because if you're working out, you want that testosterone to build the muscles. And here, this Japanese study, young men says, reverse the order. Do the cold first. So I wrote a little article about what happened to me. I put it up on the website at Morozko Forge, and nobody read it. Because nobody, who's taking my advice? I don't have 4.5 million followers on Spotify or something like that. I just put the article up because I'm like, this is really interesting. Until one guy found it. This is December 6, 2022. And I'm in Iceland with AJ, and my phone is blowing up. Tom, did you realize? Realize what? Did you know what just happened? I have no idea. Joe Rogan takes my post, and he reads it out on his Joe Rogan. He's reading it to David Goggins. And he says, there's this really amazing benefit to doing the cold before you do your exercise. David Goggins says, that's terrible. He says, now Goggins is like the toughest man in the world, and he's a Navy SEAL, and he's been in the cold. He goes, there is nothing that will make you question everything about your life like cold water. Joe goes, yeah, it's really hard, but it's working. Some things changed in my life. I started getting emails and text messages and direct messages from men all over the world. This is a 66-year-old man in Massachusetts who said, I found your article. I decided I was going to do my cold, I was going to jump in the pond, and then I was going to, like soccer mom, walk home. That's all he does. Just a little bit of light exercise. His testosterone goes up just as high as mine. He's 10 years older than me. And it turns out that that bit about high testosterone increasing the risk of prostate cancer is totally frickin' wrong. This is what I mean by a revolution. We have been harboring misconceptions about cold and metabolism for decades, and they are just now turning around because scientists are doing the studies that produce the data. This is Craig Heller. He's at Stanford University. I pulled this from the Huberman podcast. Craig says there's more than just metabolic gains. He goes, I've taken my graduate students and invented a device that will extract heat out of their palms. He calls it the Coolmint, and then measure their work output. And don't quote me on this, but it's like 150% more pull-ups that they can do. There's an improvement in endurance, and there's an improvement in peak muscle capacity, and it's not small. It's enormous. So I go to ARX in Austin, and where they can measure all these things, and I try it out. And sure enough, the people who are doing ice bath before they do their exercise are getting 25 to 30% performance boost, which is totally different than what your high school track coach taught. Do the cold first, the exercise after. And there's some good science showing that your heart doesn't work as hard, your metabolism doesn't work as hard, your muscles don't heat up as fast, and you recover faster when you pre-cool your workout. This is Dean Hall. He didn't care about pre-cooling. He cared about living because he had 2 diagnoses of cancer, leukemia and lymphoma. And he did an extended interview with me. He turned out he's a customer. He reached out to me and he said, I got to keep doing ice baths because that's what saved my life. He swam the entire length of the Willamette River in Oregon. And he did it because he had terminal cancer, and he told his doctor he wanted to do something to inspire other cancer patients before he died. When he went into the Willamette, he had leukemia. When he came out of the Willamette, he did not. What happened? This is AJ, the woman that I was in Iceland with. She's here. She's video recording right now. I was in Austin at ARX. I got a phone call, and she said, I'm in a lot of pain. I said, get to the hospital. She said, I don't know, maybe it's just an ovarian cyst or something, but it feels worse. She gets to the hospital, and I get on a plane. And when I land, she says, The doctors they haven't told me anything. They haven't said what's wrong with me, because her case had gone all the way up to the tumor board. What was wrong with her was a spontaneous growth on her tumor that had expanded out to like 4 centimeters. It was inoperable. Radiation and chemo wouldn't touch it. They can't remove it because the liver bleeds out, and she has a history of a bleeding disorder. It could be the operation that kills her. So when the doctor came down and she said, "What is it?" They said, "Well, you know, it's a tumor. What can you do?" And he said, "Nothing. We're going to do watchful waiting." Watchful waiting? What the hell is that? That's a death sentence for a woman with 4 daughters. I said, "Well, I know what you're going to do. You're going to do what I did. You're going to do what Dean did. You're going to go keto, and you're going to get yourself in the ice bath," which she did. It took a few months. It took some more reading. This is Thomas Seyfried's book. He's at Boston University, or maybe it's Boston College. I get him confused. He wrote this book called The Metabolic, or Espousing the Metabolic Theory of Cancer. This is cancer as a metabolic disease, not a genetic disease, but a metabolic disease. This is Seyfried's work on keto and chemo. When you combine keto with chemo, sure, it turns out you get better survival rates in mice. This is another Swedish group. This is Secchi et al. They didn't do keto. They just did cold exposure and mice. They said, when you take a mouse, which is designed in the lab to die of cancer, but you give them 4 hours of cold, this is just cold air, every day, their tumor growth grows more slowly, their lives extend. And then the Swedes did something remarkable. They took a Hodgkin's patient and they replicated the results. What's going on? The cold air activates the brown fat, whether it's in mice or whether it's in human being. And the brown fat preferentially clears glucose out of the bloodstream. What do I mean by preferentially? The tumors depend upon glucose to grow. When the brown fat is activated, it sucks the glucose out of the bloodstream, burns it up into heat, and the tumors starve. This is the mechanism by which the Secchi et al. Paper is saying cold will inhibit tumor growth. This is a woman from the United Kingdom, been reading my stuff, and she reached out. Stage 4 cancer diagnosis. They told her the same thing, watchful waiting. She called me when she was 10 months past her death date, because they told her, "Well, you got so many, years to live. You should go get your affairs in order." She said, "Tom, my affairs? The hell with my affairs are my kid. My affairs are my farm. My affairs is my husband. These are my affairs. How am I supposed to get them in order?" She said, "I'm not doing blood scans. I'm not doing tomography. I'm not doing any of that stuff anymore. There's nothing they can do to help me. I'm just doing ice baths." She texted me about a month after. She said she was really scared because she had a pain in her hip. She said she had to go back for the scan. What if it was the cancer? What if this was the end? She's cancer-free. From stage 4 to 0. The pain in her hip was something to do with her lumbar. It doesn't have anything to do with cancer. And so these experiences, remember, I don't have the disadvantage, I don't have the handicap of being a medical doctor, so I don't have to worry about all the things that they taught in medical school. I'm an engineer. I make equipment so people can choose their own health state. And these incredible, miraculous-sounding stories are consistent with the science that I'm reading from Seyfried and Secchi and others. I get more of these. And sometimes I get ones that aren't so miraculous, but the same thing works for Hashimoto's. Your doctor will tell you Hashimoto's thyroiditis is chronic, it's degenerative, you've got to be on medication for the rest of your life. Well, Courtney Hunt is a medical doctor, and when she was diagnosed with Hashimoto's, she said, "You know what? I don't believe it." She doesn't believe her own training any more than I believe the nutritionists and the dieticians who were trying to tell me how to take care of my son. She reversed her Hashimoto's. How did she do it? Keto and cold exposure. And that's not why I wrote the book. This is why I wrote the book. This is my mother, 2 weeks before she died, of dementia. What were they feeding her? That was on her shelf. I didn't get to see her for a couple of years. And COVID, whatever. And as soon as I got out there, and this is what they're feeding her. Sugar, cream of wheat made with Ensure. And if she finishes it all, then she gets a chocolate chip cookie as a reward. But her motor control is so bad, she can barely get the chocolate chip cookie to her mouth with using her dominant hand. She didn't know who I was. This is my grandfather, her father. I put that picture there because you can almost see a glint of recognition in her eye. I'm named for him. 2 weeks later, she passed away, and that was merciful because there's nothing that ice baths or cold exposure could have done for her then. Her life was gone. So I knew more people have to know. These little articles that I'm putting on Morozko that nobody sees until Joe Rogan reads one out, more people need that information. You don't have to buy a book. All of the articles are up on Morozko Forge, but nobody watches them. Once you put them together in a book, now people are like, ah, that must be real, and it makes it easier for people to read. There's another book. This is Ben Bickman's Why We Get Sick. He's Brigham Young University. He and I have talked a little bit about insulin, about pregnancy, about puberty, about insulin resistance, about metabolism, about brown fat. Ben's lab is all organized around the action of insulin. He's taught me quite a bit. Insulin and mitochondria go together like this. The reason people become insulin resistant is because the mitochondria are damaged. Now, you can't, quote Ben, attribute that to me, because this is a very controversial statement. The mitochondria are inside the cell. They're already damaged by the time insulin resistance shows up, by the time type 2 diabetes shows up. Type 2 diabetes is not the problem. Type 2 diabetes is your body's attempt to find a solution to damaged mitochondria, to keep the glucose in the bloodstream so they don't hurt the mitochondria anymore. How do you help the mitochondria? Well, Patrick Porter can measure the quality of your mitochondria. He put me through his neurocheck that he was just talking to you about. And he showed me all my meridians, and he said, Tom, you're at like 95%. If you haven't done the neurocheck, then you might not know what I'm talking about. But when you do, you go from 0 to 100. He goes, I can't help you. I go, why not? He goes, well, you know, I have Dave Asprey's guys come in here, and they're usually in really good shape. They're like 88%, and I tell them, I put them in the brain tap. I can get them up to 95%. I can get them to 96%. You're already there. I can't help you. I go, hey, it must be the ice baths, right? I'm feeling pretty good about myself, but I don't really know like what any of this is. It's the first time I've met Patrick. He goes, let me show you one more screen. Flips over. He says, you're 32 years old. Now, that's a biological age. How does he measure that? Not telomere length, not DNA methylation. He's measuring the energy that my mitochondria produce. He's measuring the activity of my mitochondria. 32 years old, I was 50-something at the time. I see him a couple of years later at Phoenix, and I say, hey, let's get another one of those. Let's see how old I am now. He goes, sure, you're 30. Evidently, in those 2 years, I had aged in reverse, according to NeuroCheck, because there is nothing that helps your mitochondria, that stimulates mitobiogenesis better than cold exposure. And why is that such a good thing? Because the mitochondria are what control vasodilation. And it turns out that for a man to get an erection, he's got to have good mitochondria to do that vasodilation. It used to be that they thought the endothelial cells in the smooth, or that signal the smooth muscle tissue that control vasodilation, the doctors used to think that they didn't use ATP. They didn't need mitochondria. And now this paper comes out, and it says, darn right they do. If your mitochondria aren't healthy, then your blood vessels aren't healthy. And so this is why erectile dysfunction is now considered a earliest clinical indication of a mitochondrial disorder, that is, insulin resistance and other metabolic disease. So the Czech army tried this out. They took soldiers, they did cold, they did some exercise, exactly the protocol that I wrote about. And sure enough, the Czech soldiers all reported an improvement in sexual satisfaction. That could just be the testosterone. Remember, testosterone for men after exercise goes down. I'm sorry, if you do your cold after exercise, testosterone goes down. If you do it before your exercise, testosterone goes up. But what happens in women? When a woman does cold exposure, she doesn't, there's only one study, but it doesn't indicate she needs exercise after. She gets an instantaneous testosterone boost. And if you remember, testosterone is the lust hormone. So AJ and I kind of accidentally put this to the test. This is us at a photo shoot, and we're there for Morozko, and we're going to do ice baths, but you can see we can't stand each other right now. We're in the middle of a big argument. She can't even look at me, and I'm going, why did I agree to this? We get into the ice bath, and she's softening up a little bit. We're holding hands. We're doing the photo shoot. We're breathing together. We're looking into one another's eyes. I get a smile. That's all of that brain chemistry coming up into her brain. For me, not testosterone yet, but for her, a little testosterone, some norepinephrine, some dopamine. You can see where this is going. This is the best laboratory experiment I have ever done. My daughter's on the camera, and she's like, you two get a room. Like, she's like, cut, it's over, and we are back in love. This is what I mean when I say everything is changing about our understanding of cold exposure. It turns out that the cold stimulates all the neurochemicals associated with the 3 brain systems of love. Try it with your partner. Now, I promised Lars in the 30 seconds I have left to say something about the title. The cryotherapy, that is the cold air versus the cold water, because you may have noticed that a lot of the studies are coming out of cryo chambers, not just out of the ice bath. So I put together this table comparing the two. Water has a much higher thermal conductivity. It will suck the heat right out of you. And that means that you can get the same benefit at a higher temperature. In cryo, you've got to go below freezing, which creates a risk of frostbite. But in water, there's no risk of frostbite. On the other hand, some people don't want to get wet. And you have the sanitation issue that comes with the water. The cold bath can be grounded, the cryo chamber cannot, so you can stack some benefits. And lastly, you can get some halotherapy. I haven't seen it out on the floor here. I haven't seen the person who's got the cryo chamber with the halotherapy built in. But although, as an engineer, I'm thinking, that's what I got to do as soon as I get home. Invent that. You can get some halotherapy, some salt therapy when you're doing the cold plunge. As long as your equipment is certified to take the Epsom salt or the Dead Sea salts or whatever you're using, you can get some transdermal magnesium benefit. You can get some halotherapy while you're in the ice bath. So the comparison doesn't mean that one is better than the other. It means there are these both. I get a lot of these questions. Now that people are starting to pay more attention, now that I got the book and it's out by our table, people ask me these kinds of things. I can answer all of these questions when we're at the table, but I'm going to zero in on what's the best water temperature and how long should I plunge, because there's a lot of information on the internet. When you are starting out, if this is your first time, and TheraFrost is out there, I think CryoPlunge is out there, I think you can try it right here. When you're starting out, go cold enough to gasp. Go long enough to feel a little shiver. You don't need a thermometer. You don't need a timer. You need to be in touch with your own body. And that's because there is as yet no reliable science on dose. There's no reliable science on all the systems of cold acclimation that are going on in your body. Everybody for right now is different. When you're starting out, go cold enough to gasp, go long enough to shiver. After you become acclimated, I do 2 to 4 minutes a day. I do it at 34 degrees. Yeah, it's cold as hell. I got a video of Patrick Porter in his first ice bath that he was talking about, and it's up on my Instagram. If you want to see Patrick, I shouldn't say anything because he was very brave to do it, but if you want to see him scared out of his mind, go to my Instagram, watch his first ice bath. He already told you that his second one was better. He was gasping and he was shivering, and that meant he was doing it right. Other than that, you can find the book at our table. I only brought 50 copies. It's not available on Amazon. You can't get it on Audible or Kindle. And the fact is, I'm so embarrassed about this book because when I look at it, I think of all the things that I've done wrong. And so AJ and I, we agreed. We were going to bring 50 copies to CryoCon. Maybe some people, after they hear me talk for 30 minutes, want to read some more. When you get one of these copies, we're selling them at cost. When you get one, read it and then write to me. Tell me, how do I make this book better? How do I make it more sensible? Because this summer, when I get the guts, I will go to Amazon. I will put it out there for the world. And hopefully, it will have your quotes in it. It will have like those dust jacket markers that say, hey, I met Dr. Seager at CryoCon. This book was so helpful, or something like that helps people sell books. And hopefully, it will be, in my mind, good enough to sell it to the world. Thank you very much.